All right. We're coming to a conclusion. It'll be tomorrow, actually. It's a very short class today. We're coming to a conclusion of the 26th letter. So we're speaking about Torah teachings, and what is a difference between what we call nigla, the revealed parts of the Torah, and the mystical, the inner dimension, which is what we're learning, which the forerunner to this was the Zohar, and the inner dimension versus the outer dimension. So the outer dimension of Torah, the core of it, the essence of it, is of course divine. No question. But just because something is divine, that doesn't mean it is readily clear and obvious and available, shall we say. As we explained yesterday, in the evolutionary process from the spiritual to the physical, there was what we call shviras hakelim, the breaking of the vessels. The light was too great. The vessel couldn't contain it, much like, if you have like a 5-ounce cup, and then you take this huge gallon, 5-gallon barrel, and you start pouring from a 5-gallon barrel into a, 5-ounce cup. Well, what's going to happen? It's going to overflow. It's going to knock over. It's going to go over the edge, and if it's made of earthenware, it's going to fall on the floor, and it's going to shatter into pieces. Well, that's what happened on high. And those shatterings now came into the physical world primarily, and they are covered over. Those sparks, those shards of holiness, because after all it is the vessel, a divine vessel on high, which, as we've explained, the divine attributes are made up of light and vessel, just as we are made up of body and soul. Right? That's the way it's expressed in this world. In the spiritual world, it's light and vessel. And those shards of holiness are encumbered. They're covered over by a shell that doesn't allow for its holiness to be revealed. Now, as we explained yesterday, our engagement in the physical world is to refine this physical world. So we don't run away from the physical world like most faiths believe that if you want to be connected to God, you need to remove yourself from this world, because this is a dog-eat-dog rat race. So you gotta, be on top of a Tibetan mountain, gaze the heavens above, or your navel below. Sorry. And that way you'll connect to the Almighty. But no. That's not our job over here. But that's in the physical. The uniqueness over here in this letter, as we mentioned yesterday, and to reiterate, to make sure we have this point very clear, is that those shards of sparks of holiness are also embedded in being the divine wisdom of God in the shell of Klippa, and we need to discover it. How are we going to discover it? By using our minds to the arguments back and forth in the rationale and the reasoning discussed in the Talmud, for example, to understand and to finally adjudicate a law. So before the deliberation, this wisdom was concealed. So, for example, let's give an example. That which is in the Talmud is not concealed. It's already there. Okay, you need to engage and use your mind to understand and to plumb the depth of the logic and the rationale and of the teachings, fine. But so that's just kind of hidden more from me than it is something that needs to be truly discovered. But let's take an example of like electricity. How do we look at electricity in Jewish law? Now we know we can't make a fire on Shabbos, but what's electricity? Is it a fire? Is it closing of a circuit, and therefore it's maki b'patish? It's the last hammer nail to fix and finish, making the building, so to speak. Finish the creative process. How do you look at it? Well, in its day, it wasn't clear. Or, for example, Ilan Ramon, a blessed memory, Israeli, who went out into space. So although he personally was not, perhaps didn't observe Shabbos every week or to its fullest, but when he went, he knew he was representing not just Israel, but the Jewish people around the globe, and he wanted to do it in a Jewish way. So he wanted to keep Shabbos. But it became a halachic issue. What is Shabbos when you're in outer space? Being that I think that the sunrise, sunset was every I don't know, it was every 70 minutes. I don't remember the time, but that's not so important. The point is that there need to be adjudication of law. What does it mean to keep Shabbos in outer space when the sunrise, sunset is happening on Earth time every 70 minutes, or whatever it was, right? What does that mean? It means, as is brought down from the Zohar, that when you have a problematic query, that emanates from the negative side. Now, why would a query, a question, come from a negative side? Well, simply because you don't have clarity. What does clarity mean? Clarity means that the will of God is evident. If the will of God isn't evident, if the wisdom of God isn't evident, that means it's covered over and it needs to be discovered, unwrapped, unraveled, in order that you can finally know what the will of God, what the teachings and the wisdom of God is. But it means it's in klipa. Well, that's the negative side. The fact that I have a question, I don't have clarity, that's the reason. It was a beautiful story with the Rizhner Rebbe, who was a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe, a tzaddik. But this is when he was a child. I don't know if he was 5 years old or 7 years old, but a young child, and he was in Cheder, and they were talking about the laws of Shabbos, and that when does Shabbos begin? When you see three medium stars. Well, nightfall begins at least. Shabbos begins with sunset. So he was, he says, Rebbe, I don't understand. What do you mean, when does Shabbos begin? Well, you just go outside and look in the heavens and you'll know when Shabbos begins. Now, he was a child prodigy. He was a very spiritual and very attuned to the divine order of things, that he was able to look up in the sky and know when there's an elevation of Malchus above, when there's an elevation of this world to its source, and that's when Shabbos begins. That's when Shabbos begins. The world is elevated to a different level. In other words, for us, is there 3 stars out now? Are they 3 medium stars? It's a little bit cloudy. Oh, well, it's not so. We have a query. Why? Because there might be some clouds covering over. But a person who has clarity, it's says the Chayzer from Lublin. He was called the seer from Lublin because he could see from one side of the world to the other side of the world. What does that mean? There was no clouds or mountains or anything that didn't give him a clarity and to be able to see whatever he needed to see. I'm talking about righteous people. In other words, a righteous person is someone who there's nothing that separates between them and their divine source. So when you have something that's separating from its divine source, that's klipa. That's a negative thing. So that because of that, you have a question. Now, that's the way God created the world, so it's not like, we're terrible people. If we have a question, on the contrary, we should. But God creates the world that way. As we said, the shattering of the vessels, Shviras HaKelim, produced in this world, that the divine wisdom fell into, Chachma of Atzilus, fell into places that it's concealed, that divine wisdom. And it can be even for the righteous person. I'm not talking just for me and you. For us, a lot's concealed. For a righteous person who's studying Torah, it's also concealed because that's their job here in this world, is to sift out of all of the negative, or of all the sparks of holiness and godliness that are encumbered, and unencumber them, allow them to be revealed. And now you can have an understanding of this idea. Now, me and you, or you and I, or me, myself, and I, speak to myself, we will, in general, our job is to do that in the physical realm. And that's why eating kosher is so important for someone's Jewish. If you're not Jewish, you don't need no mitzvah to do that. You're Jewish, you gotta eat kosher. And whether it's 100% or not is irrelevant. You gotta eat more and more kosher. What is it? Why? Because in the physical, you are refining it through that which is completely, from the negative side, and that which is an admixture. Something that's kosher, it's an admixture of good and evil. Because it could still be abused, the food, right? Eating as a glutton. But if you eat it with a blessing, a bracha, and you eat it with being mindful that this is giving you energy to serve God, you're elevating. So we do that in the physical. The sages of Israel, they do that in the spiritual. Not in the physical too, but more so in the spiritual, meaning in the divine wisdom that is encumbered in klipa. So yes, they have questions too. Because not everything of divine teachings is so obviously clear. Sure, we're going to learn a little more about that in tomorrow, the final class, on how that will be in the times to come. Oh, no, actually, tomorrow's not the final class. 2 more days. We will learn how that is to be, how that will be different in times to come, in times of Mashiach. But right now, exile, what does exile mean? So we have a new idea here. We've learned in the previous letter, exile means the presence of God is in exile, meaning the Shekhinah, right? That's what we learned in the previous, and that's how there can be vitality giving to the negative side, to evil people, to doing, or to a person to do an act of evil, as we learned in the previous. That's how there is vitality in the physical world, of physical things, that are created, exist, and have vitality, and our job is to sift through that. And in this slide that we're speaking about now, when it comes to Torah, we can have a part in that, but it's going to be limited. Our part of deliberating, elucidating, taking a problematic query in Jewish teachings and going back and forth with the rationale and coming to adjudicate a law, or to give clarity in Jewish teachings. Not that we cannot do that. The truth is we should engage in that, but that's going to be limited because, to take some food and make a blessing, to make a bracha on it, and use the energy thereof to do a mitzvah, to come and learn Tanya and do other acts of loving kindness, well, that's all of us have the capability, opportunity to do that. Something we learned in the first part of Tanya in chapter 35 through 37. Here, again, we're speaking about it, that it's encumbered, divine wisdom, in Klippa, in order that we should be able to find that wisdom, discover that wisdom, and then apply it to electricity, apply it to Ilan Ramon, who is in a spacecraft, in a different reality, shall we say. So there needs to be a great deliberation, elucidation, in order to adjudicate. We're going to have limitations in that area. But important concept to understand, and even that, all of us, we do. We I think it might be into one of the days after class at the Alter Rebbe we'll address that, if I recall. That's it. It's a very short class today. I made it long. Let's see. Any questions? I don't see. All right. Folks, sharing is caring. Please share the Alter Rebbe's teachings with others. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you, Tanya. Have a wonderful day.